There will always be someone selling BS, but you can learn how to spot it. Welcome, Mere Mortalites, to another round of the Mere Mortals book reviews. I'm your host here, Kyron, live on the 3rd of September 2025. And as you might surmise, as indicated by the name, this is the podcast where I expose the lies of the big science industry, especially Big Banana. Damn you, Big Banana. No, we're not going to be doing that today, but we will see some of that in this book, which we have here, Bad Science by Ben Goldacre. So this was published originally in 2008. It's 339 pages in length, relatively smallish. It's got a couple of little graphs and things in here, so it won't take you too long to get through. I'd say it took me like 6 to 7 hours reading in total, something like that. And it's an expose of sorts on the media and in particular individuals, but also the media as a whole, relating to distorting of statistics and science. So in particular scientific data. So he'll explain the various errors that they commit in their analysis of studies, of trials and things like this, how they're reported to the general public. And then he also explains the underlying reasons why they might be committing this, which can involve some level of stupidity / ignorance / malevolence and various proportions of that according to the topic and the industry and things like that. So there is 16 chapters in total, and they are labeled things like matter, brain gym, the progenium XY complex, which all were kind of like unhelpful. I had no idea what they meant at the start. But then it gets onto things like homeopathy, the placebo effect. He examines the media's MMR hoax, as well as things like nutrition, and in particular doctors, Gillian McKeith, PhD, and Professor Patrick Holford, who are listed in the actual chapters themselves. So there's a bit of call outs of actual individuals, but then also of organizations and of particular topics. You will find some graphs and things like that within the book, but there is not that many. It's mostly about the writing and quoting of people and things like this. So what is bad science, and what is the media's role in promoting it? I guess you'd call this the educational section of the podcast, so settle in. And probably worth most of your time if you are an average lay person, in a sense. Both of those questions are interesting. So I'll tackle the bad science portion, then we'll go on to the media portion of this book. So on your screen right now, there's a list. This is from an external source outside of the book, but it gives a very good, brief indication of some of the things you need to look out for when the scientific method is distorted, misinterpreted, and analyzed incorrectly, or when the actual method itself is not followed. So some of these many of these are found within the book, and I'll link them to particular things he talks about, but just going over here: sensationalized headlines, misinterpreted results, conflicts of interest, correlation and causation, speculative language, sample size too small, no blind testing, no control groups, cherry-picked results, unreplicable results, all these sorts of things. So what are some of the things we'll see within the book? Well, one of the big sections right at the end, which was on the MMR vaccine autism link. So this was around the 2000s period where there was this kind of hoax, which he calls, and was propagated by the media. This was particularly in Britain, in England, I guess, and it was related that the 3-jab vaccines was causing the autism in kids, and they were saying there was these links from this. So in particular, there was a study by Andrew Wakefield, which analyzed 12 kids and showed, there's this kind of gut bacteria thing or something like this, and this is the link, etc., etc. He had a rather big conflict of interest, and this was that I think he owned a clinic treating autism, so it was very much in his favor to kind of be promoting this. And there was some very ethical dubiousness on whether the 12 kids in this study actually needed lumbar punctures and colonoscopies that they ended up receiving. Whether that was medically necessitated by their doctors or whether he was kind of doing this to prove a point and, further an agenda of his. We have things like unreplicable results. So this was the MRSA superbug, once again in England. Ben Goldacre is an English author, so he's talking about things in his own country. And this was essentially saying, there's all of these superbugs in hospitals. And so there was these investigative reporters going to places, going to their walls and in hospitals, taking some samples. And there was all these findings showing, there's superbugs in all of these hospitals. This is terrible. They're not keeping the hospitals clean. They're dangerous places, etc., etc. But in reality, they were just taking all of these results to one dude called, what was his name? Christopher Maljuszewicz. I'm pretty sure that's Polish. Way too many Z's and W's in that name. And it was just some random dude in his backyard shed laboratory who was finding all of these results. And they were unreplicable. If you took them to more standard professional laboratories, they weren't getting the same things from the same samples, hence indicating that perhaps his sampling equipment was contaminated and he wasn't very thorough in his process, etc., etc. The media jumped onto this, though, of course, and tasty headlines, MRSA superbugs, and so unreplicable results, it doesn't really matter if we're getting good headlines and sales. This goes on and on. Cherry picking of data. They talked about Linus Pauling and the link between vitamin C and the cold, where he was picking studies and trials that supported his thesis from the get-go. Small sample sizes. Did you know cocaine use in British children doubled over a year period? But it was done on 9,000 kids is, I believe, actually a decent sample size, but the questionnaire, how the trial was conducted, and it wasn't, randomized. They weren't doing these double-blind studies, things like this. It's so easy to pick out results, and even things as simple as reporting that it went from 1% to 2% when in fact it was actually from 1.3 to 1.9%. The effect is halved from what they're saying. So you can't say it doubled. It was actually, 25% up. And this is a very common thing you'll see in media, highlighting statistics and blowing things out of proportion when it's sure, something may have doubled in likelihood, but the doubling could be from 1 in 55 million to 1 in, what would that be, 27.5 million. So yes, it's doubled, but it's still very, very unlikely. And this just goes on and on. I'm not going to be able to touch upon all of these things. Speculative language, recent research, for example, showing that turmeric is highly protective against many forms of cancer, especially of the prostate, which was just taken from this random, turmeric reacting with some sort of bacteria in a petri dish, extrapolating that out and saying, okay, it's working in this way. And so, it's highly protective when in fact to ingest the amount needed by just doing some simple math, you'd need to eat 100 grams of turmeric, which is it's like trying to eat 100 grams of cinnamon in a spoon. If you've seen those challenges of people putting that in their mouth and then just coughing it up. So, all sorts of things, authority writing, Gillian McKeith, PhD, which was actually from a non-accredited American correspondent course, and she was selling pills and enzyme powder as a medical doctor on kind of what you'd expect the standard TV back in those days. This is the early 2000s, remember, which he's really talking about in this book, maybe late 90s as well. And there was just many more things. Correlation not equaling causation, calculating statistics wrong. Probably the worst case he talks about in this book was Sally Clark, who had a child with SIDS, two children who had SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And I don't know that much about it, but it's a very rare thing to happen. And they were saying it's so rare. 1 in 3,845, I believe, was the number. And if you multiply the chances of that happening, it's 1 in 57 million or 1 in 27 million of this happening. and this should only happen once in 100 years. And this was presented in a court case that was against her. And the doctor who did this, one, did the math wrong, and it actually isn't even that likely because there's genetic factors and things like this. So if you have one child die from SIDS, it's probably more likely that you're going to have another one. Barring that, the more egregious thing was they presented this statistic in court, and therefore the jury interpreted it as, okay, there's a 1 in 27 million chance, for example, that she is innocent. Whereas in fact, you could just do the same math and go, okay, what's the likelihood of a parent committing a double murder against their child? And it's like 1 in 58 million, 1 in 100 million, even more unlikely than 2 children dying. So the way that people use statistics, especially in a one-off case and a non-nuanced discussion or argument, is egregious at the best of times. You've always got to be careful with statistics when it's just a one single thing like that. And unfortunately, she went to jail for many years. Essentially, her life was ruined. She ended up dying from, I think it was alcohol poisoning. You know, a very traumatic case where her 2 children died, and then she got blamed for it at the same time. So all sorts of things like this where you go, okay, the science is hard. Science is very hard, and bad science, which he's talking about in here, is when things get misinterpreted, when the trials themselves aren't conducted in an ethical manner or in a manner which is going to show results, or people come into things trying to prove something already if they've got an economic incentive. There's all these sorts of things happening. So what about the news section or the media portion of this? Because that's probably always going to happen. Science is very hard, and there needs to be some leeway and a lot of nuance in this. And how should the media, or how does the media report on these sorts of things? And look, I have long, a little personal section here, I've long derided the mainstream news and medical aspect for sure, but in general mainstream news, for not being a truth-telling machine. My main reasoning is that the advertising model, which they largely rely upon, especially nowadays compared to perhaps the past where subscriptions could sustain a newspaper, this is largely not the case. Advertising is the dominant and has been for a long time. Just creates a perverse incentive where it's not about truth-telling, it's about making money. It's about getting headlines, and this is not a new thing. Attention economy, we've all heard this sorts of things. So his section in the book on nutrition highlights, I guess, some of the intellectual grievances, which are just as bad in terms of why things get distorted and why truth-telling is not what is occurring, but in fact is something else. The newspapers or the media, the TV, documentaries, all these sorts of things, they're not showcasing truth. They're showcasing something else. And what is this something else? Well, another quick backstory here. I've got a bachelor's degree in engineering. Did that a long time ago. I did relatively well at that, and this is actually linked to a portion, one of the chapters in the book, which is called Why Clever People Believe Stupid Things. And in a certain extent, you could call me clever because I got good results, but I am definitely stupid in many, many, many things. And I remember when I was doing probably the most scientific thing I've done in my life, which was writing my thesis to graduate as part of my degree. And the amount of cherry picking of data, of trying to find something to be able to write about in my thesis, I was doing it on like mine seals for underground mines and how to best do that properly, considering factors of like water, explosives, things like this, or explosions that can happen because of trapped up gas, pent up gas underground, and structural earthquakes, all these sorts of things. And I remember just doing this, and I was like, this is not a great thing. What I'm producing here is not going to produce stuff that is, I think, going to be useful for the world, because I didn't have an academic training per se, and really the ethics of it. What was being highlighted to be by my professors and teachers was not like academic rigor. It was, you got to produce something. And, it was the final year of university. I wanted to get this thing fucking done because I was sick of being at university. And so I look at this and I go, what was the reasons for this? And sure, I produced a piece of academic literature, but it is not worthy of citation. It is worthy of being ridiculed for cherry picking of data, of looking to prove a hypothesis. And it's fine coming in with a hypothesis, but really trying to prove it and then altering your methods and cherry picking and, using statistics to find things is no bueno. It's not good. And thankfully, I was doing it in an industry where it actually didn't matter, and I'm pretty sure that thing has never been cited. I'm not even sure how you'd find it. With all of that being said, what you see in this book is way, way, way worse than anything I ever did by a huge margin. And so what do we see with how the media present certain things and individuals as well? So we can kind of understand individuals doing things for personal gain. Perhaps they want the fame. Perhaps they are looking for money. Perhaps they're trying to, justify their position, their role, all these sorts of things. That's okay. It's not okay, but it's understandable. You can see why this is going to happen and how it's probably impossible to stop anyone from doing things like that. And I'm very much more of the free will type stuff. People are going to do things, and mistakes will happen on a small individual level. But when you're getting to media organizations where there should be levels to this stuff of, okay, this is perhaps more of an expert in the field of nutrition or writing on these things. There probably needs to be like an editor going over this and a fact checker, and you can misrepresent things. You probably need lawyers looking over what you're saying and saying, like, is this justifiable in terms of extrapolating from this data? Is this a reasonable thing? Just basic common sense is terrible. And so what are some of the things we see from this? We see things like antioxidants are good, so drink red wine and eating dark chocolate. There was this story about trying to prove who had the sexiest strut, and they ended up finding that Jessica Alba did. And this was one sponsored by a hair removal cream company. They asked a doctor to come up with a formula or proof to rank this survey data that they'd done. And they wanted them to be showing that people like Jessica Alba and who's the Latina singer, Jenny from the Block, whatever her name is, to prove that they had sexier struts than someone like Kate Moss or Amy Winehouse. And so they got this doctor to come up with this like ridiculous formula related to probably like stride length, hip ratio, probably something about legs, so that the hair removal cream company could be like, hey, look at these sexy legs, this is important. That's the more humorous, comical side, if also just very highlighting how stupid the media can do in promoting these things. The more gross ones are the MMR, MRSA scares, which kind of showed a coordinated effort to not be seeking the truth, publishing what will sell, and kind of going out of their way to misinterpret data, or when there is pushback, saying like, no, you're wrong, we're the media company, we're promoting this is, and I very much do see it as promotion, and this just occurs continually throughout the book. So I find it's funny, whilst reading all these different sections, I found his outrage, and the book is written in a style where he's making fun of a lot of these instances, bringing it to light, showing like, this particular person wrote about this particular thing and they're wrong, here's why. And I found it more palatable or acceptable when he was talking about the media organizations as a whole fucking things up and misrepresenting things and I'm not really sure why I find that more acceptable than compared to like your average nutritionist on TV or homeopath coming up with equally ridiculous things related to, this, if you eat this one thing, it's going to improve your chances of X by 500% or whatever. And I think the reason, because they're very similar in many ways, both contain misguided fools, whether this be the homeopath or the journalist just writing random shit. Both have a profit incentive linked to their misunderstanding, whether they're selling newspapers or selling pills or selling their latest XYZ book. I'm not sure. I think it's probably because I feel there's a bit more malice or intentionality in the media, journalists and in particular, when they are misreporting scientific data, probably because they're part of a corporation. It feels there should be more checks and balances. Whereas I feel the homeopaths and people who are along those lines are more simpletons in a way, where they think they're doing good. They just don't understand. Like, they're just so ignorant of what they're doing. Maybe I'm wrong on that. It's probably not the case, and I should perhaps reverse that perception, as both can cause ill effects for their consumers. Perhaps that's the thing. The MMR and MRSA hoaxes, misinterpretations, cause people to do things which had, I would say, a more negative outcome. They would not get vaccines for their children, and hence the amount of measles in the UK went from essentially nothing to, okay, now we've got like a serious problem here. But you can also have the same thing if someone's saying like, oh, you just need to eat, eat dark chocolate and red wine, and those antioxidants will cause you to live longer or something like that. Maybe they won't go to the doctor because of that. Yeah, or if they're getting a homeopathic alternative medicine treatment instead of drugs or something. Yeah, it's a tricky topic. So I guess, like, summarizing this sort of section, what are his suggestions for helping fix these problems related to bad science and media? From what I can tell, it was more of a call to individual action, as structural changes probably won't take place, and the individual action can take the part of the person actually doing the science, and then someone more like me who's a consumer of information. So statistics are always going to get misinterpreted by the media and promoted for that. The incentive model for a lot of media, I still think the advertising model is inherently going to stuff you up. You're whether it be for an small individual podcast like mine, or whether it be for something much larger like an organization, or like the New York Times, for example, or something even bigger like a social media network like Facebook or Twitter. There's going to be problems from that sort of method. So he is really saying, like, look, you as a layperson can understand these things, what we talked about, the misinterpreted results. You can do basic things to look at trials and studies and say, okay, was this actually done in a semi-correct manner? The problem with that is it's still rather dense. Reading trials and academic papers are very dry. I personally don't really try and do that. And then you can get into the whole statistical side of things where it's like, is this ask or correct? Did they were they cherry picking from these results? Was their multiplication done in a serious way? So that's tricky. He does have a kind of call to action for scientists, academics, that if they see things in the media that is wrong, reaching out, saying, hey, you've got this wrong, causing a bit more outrage about it, and then also being careful whilst talking to the media, because they are looking for headline attention-grabbing things, And so saying numbers more like the amount of children taking cocaine in the UK rose from 22 to 47 over this year, rather than saying a 50% increase year over year, is a smarter thing to be able to say. And then there's just danger zones of nutrition, health, when that comes into the media. It's a dangerous area to take things just at face value. So let's jump into the author, some extra details. Ben Goldacre was born in 1974. He's a doctor himself, practitioner. He calls himself a nerd evangelist, so really promoting the cause of open science, practices in clinical trials, publishing of data. I neglected to mention this, but there was plenty of times where people were saying, like, we found this data, but then not actually publishing it in a medical journal or anything like that anywhere. This was particularly related to like AIDS, the AIDS crisis, anything that gets people worried and things like this. You're going to get spruikers, quacks, all these sorts of things. His style is a real mix, and he's written a couple of other books related to this: Bad Pharma, Statins, and just assorted journalism over the years. He's got spunk, let's put it that way. So as you're reading the book, he's highly critical of certain people. It's kind of the British sarcastic / dry humor, a little bit deadpan, and he's for example says he doesn't like to pick on people, but he certainly does a lot of that in this book, calling out bad actors mostly for their methods. And I think this is one thing I'll give him some credit for. Yes, he made fun of ridiculous statements and claims, but when it came to actually saying, hey, this is how the science works, this is what they got wrong, showing misinterpreted statistics and things like this, he was a lot more serious. So I think that was probably a decent thing to do. And the book is funny in a way, but perhaps off-putting and unhelpful if he presses one of your buttons. So it's certainly easy to have just something ingrained in you from birth, from children. One thing for myself, for example, that I learned as a kid was you got to get tons of calcium, otherwise for healthy bones. I have no idea if that's true. I have no idea if milk actually does matter to drink when you're a kid, or if it's even important for me now. That's one of those things that certainly I was influenced by the media when I was a kid, and that is still somewhat stuck in me in a way, and I have no justification or reasoning for saying if that is true or not. It's just something I've heard a long time ago. So probably a critique that I have maybe on his style is I didn't like how he seemed to take joy in belittling the homeopaths in particular. Once again, perhaps that's my bias and just thinking that they're more on the side of fools rather than particularly malevolent or actually causing bad outcomes. He mentions he's had the experience of anger, accusations, lawyers coming after him, things like this. And so I could understand why he sees more of the darker and negative side of people like homeopaths and nutritionists. But when you're reading from the outside and interpreting these people as misguided / quacks, with the odd scammer here and there, it does seem to come across as rather mean and perhaps unnecessarily so in some ways. But that's his style, and it's going to attract pushback, his ridiculing. And I'll probably put this out here and address this concern that one might have, because you could read this and go, okay, but he's just promoting his book. He's promoting his newspaper and column, and perhaps he has a practice as well that he thinks if he draws attention to himself, people will come to it or something like that. And I didn't get that from him, and there's a couple of reasons for this. He also notes the opposite side of things. So he was more than willing to get into how Bad Pharma, he's got a book called Bad Pharma, about the large companies doing bad practices and things like this as well. Cherry picking data, statistics, all this sort of stuff. So he's more. I definitely got the feeling he was more just like, I want the truth. I want the truth, and the scientific method is the best way about gaining this, which is something that I personally believe as well. He, for example, something that was maybe useful for his point of view, his side, if you want to call it, was there was, after the MMR hoax, it then kind of reversed tune, as newspapers tend to do. And many years later, it was now showing like, this was all this one guy's fault, Andrew Wakefield. He's being, investigated for unethical practices. What a terrible guy. And the newspapers, this is the very same newspapers which were promoting him, 5-10 years earlier. And then claiming like the MMR autism link is definitely refuted. And Ben was saying, no, look, that's also an overreaction. That's not helpful as well. There needs to be nuance. There needs to be an understanding that these things aren't so simple. And he's got a book, I think, which is called I think you'll find it's more complicated than that, which is once again probably a terrible book title to sell books, but probably the most scientifically accurate and smartest way to present things. So although his style is provocative in many ways, that was when it was directed at the foolishness, and the science and methods were he was much more serious. On an unrelated personal note, reading this as well, before I get into the summary, how the placebo works is mysterious. Still rather mysterious. So there is a section called The Placebo Effect, which goes for 23 pages. It's really interesting. I'd always had a healthy respect for placebos, and there was just a couple of things I learned in here, telling how when doctors know they are giving a placebo, so i.e. it's not double-blind, and it has diminished effects. So when the doctor should just be in their trial saying like, here's this pill, it's going to help you. If they know the pill is just a placebo, it has a diminished effect. So it's something about the doctor's way of presenting it. Perhaps they're smiling, perhaps they're having other effects which are very tiny minutia when presenting something, can have a noticeable scientific effect, statistical effect on patients and how they feel, and how not only how they feel, but how their results in their blood and blood work and things show an improvement. So new medicine's first hurdle is to beat the state of the art, but many struggle to simply beat this placebo effect as well. The amount of times just a sugar pill can be worked just as well as millions, if not billions of dollars of research is staggering. And even the questioning of whether there is a role for an ethical placebo, which is hyping up something that has no benefit other than the placebo, kind of like bootstrapping it even to a higher level, is an interesting concept, and has given me more appreciation of the power that our own mind and kind of positive thinking can have, not only on our actions and internal feelings, but also physical results in the body. It's crazy. So jumping on to the summary, similar books, recommendations. Look, I feel like I've done a bit of an average job explaining what's within here, because there was so many studies. There was so many instances of newspapers doing things wrong, nutritionists doing things wrong, homeopaths doing things wrong, scientists doing things wrong, journalists doing things wrong, and all of the reasons that I've explained why they do it wrong. So I found some tidbits of this useful, but personally, I'd kind of already come to many of the same conclusions that the book is presenting. So once again, this could just be me seeking out things which already prove my own bias, if you want to put it that way. But I found it a useful reminder, even if I kind of alternated whilst reading between laughing at some of the things he was saying, then also just being eye-rolling or going like, that's a bit mean and unnecessarily so, in my opinion. So I think it's ultimately a beneficial book, even if it is going to alienate some people. And because it is fundamentally about the science and not the sarcasm or the witty jibes. So for example, if everyone had read this book before COVID, it probably would have saved, I'd say, like a significant portion of people a lot of mental stress, because they'd have been able to see through a lot of the fear-mongering, the hype, the scares, and perhaps even have gotten them to go, oh, okay, some of this data is being presented in a way where it is misinterpreting, or it is miscalculated, or there is an incentive of why they would be showing it this way. So tricky topics that require nuance is probably what this book is all about. So I am giving Bad Science by Ben Goldacre a very solid 7 out of 10. Yeah, worth checking out at some point if you're into it. It's a popular science book, so probably a recommendation that's similar would be something like Richard Dawkins, who I think is kind of similar. He's willing to call out and make fun of what he regards as silly positions, and whether that is to your taste or not is up to you. Like I said, I kind of alternated with this book. All the other things that I could recommend, other books medical type stuff I've reviewed on this channel before, like what was the Siddhartha Mukherjee's one on cancer, The Emperor of All Maladies, and other just medical ones. They're less spicy, so this was a kind of a spicy book. So be warned. Let's jump into the last sections here. I mentioned previously no advertising, and I take that seriously. So this is a value for value podcast. I put all of this out here for free, and I just ask that you provide some value in return. Many different ways of doing this. The simple stuff: liking, subscribing, commenting, telling a friend about the Mere Mortals book reviews, and any of our other podcasts, checking out any of the other ones that we've got. Links down below to our website and things like this. You can also give me a book recommendation. What do you think I would enjoy? What would you like to see me review on this channel? And then finally, a monetary aspect. If you want to help support the channel in that way, there's a PayPal link down below, or you could use a modern podcasting app, meremortalspodcast.com/support. Last section here, what is coming up, and a reminder that I am live. I do these live on Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Ask your AI what time that is in your time zone, and really enjoy when people jump in. What is coming up? So I'm reading another Lee Kuan Yew book at the moment, and that's a thick one. So I'm probably going to have to find a small book to be able to read before next Wednesday, to be honest. So we'll see, because a couple of these books recently have been rather thick, and I've had some other stuff going on, so I haven't been reading as much as I normally do. So yeah, that one's called From Third World to First by Lee Kuan Yew. That'll either be next week or the week afterwards. So that's all I know, and one, probably still reading The Lord of the Rings, and more of that's come out soon. Long one here, but enjoyable. So thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you got some value from this, and I really do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Ciao for now. Karen out.